Welcome back to the Bob Harden Show. And now here's your host, Bob Harden.
Thanks so much for joining us here on the show. It's brought to you in part by Naples Illustrated, bringing you infinite luxury lifestyles. Visit the website, naplesillustrated.com. Coming up, we're going to visit with Larry Reed, the president of the Foundation for Economic Education. Right now we have with us Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. Dr. Jasser is an author. His book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam. He's also the founder and president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. Dr. Jasser, thank you so much for joining us.
It's always great to be with you, Bob. Thanks for having me back.
Thank you, Dr. Jasser. And for our listeners' benefit, the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, what's it all about?
Well, we're a forum that after 9/11 realized that most of the American Islamic organizations that claim to speak for Muslims is not addressing the problem, and that we felt that our mission is to separate mosque and state, that the root cause of radical Islamism is nonviolent Islamism. What's Islamism? Islamism is political Islam. It's a worldview that believes that they should establish Islamic states, and they reject secular democracies, liberal democracies, and while it's a nonviolent version of an ideology, we feel that just like in the Cold War when we were fighting not only Soviet communism, but all forms of communism were not our allies, we realize that today the Islamic world is at that time in history when it needs to reject theocracy. So basically, we're a very American form of our faith system of Islam that rejects political Islam but yet embraces liberty, embraces our faith, and feels it's the only solution forward and counter-radicalization. It's an embrace of secular liberal democracy.
I read your book, The Battle for the Soul of Islam, which I really appreciated because of your transparency on your own faith, your marriage, your family, your background, being a first-generation immigrant from Syria. Just a fabulous, fabulous story. I encourage our listeners to read the book, again, The Battle for the Soul of Islam. But, how's the battle going? I mean, it's a huge, huge battle that you're undertaking right now.
I think, if anyone's following me on social media, be it on Twitter or Facebook, you may know that I'm at Duke University today. I'm speaking to the students this evening, and the title of my talk is American Muslim Identity, Patriot or Insurgent. And that simple dichotomy triggered the Muslim Student Association to say that I'm a bigot, that I'm not qualified to speak on Islam, that I'm here to spread fear and mongering. The Duke Chronicle newspaper never even interviewed me, and yet has had 2 or 3 editorials claiming that I'm part of some right-wing program to alienate Muslims, when in fact they never even deal with our ideas. And I think the university campuses are sort of the central battleground, if you will, for that area where, listen, I understand that American Muslims, the vast majority are patriots, but we have to also realize that there is a battle between this loyalty, if you will, to a global jihadist movement that isn't always violent, can be apologetic, can be one heaped in denial, and acknowledge that the response, the solution to that is to believe in the American system, to believe that the separation of church and state, the Jeffersonian concept of American freedom is a solution to that Islamism. And yet many students on campus often don't want to deal with the ideas. Today they had the third editorial about my visit. Today's editorial says that I'm not qualified to speak on Islam, that they have Islamic professors that would be much more qualified. And that sort of tells you where the mindset is that don't deal with the message, don't deal with the ideas. But on the other side, Bob, we've had a lot of support. Our Muslim reform movement now has over 20 different organizations that are part of it in the U.S., Canada, and Europe. And along with the pushback, we get a lot of support from folks who say, you know what? This is the best way to melt away bigotry that may exist against Muslims, is for Americans to see Muslims being contrite and taking ownership for our own problems.
I really admire the fact that you're walking into it's just a very difficult situation there, and you have a confluence of, first of all, what's happening with the intolerance at universities, along with the resistance that you have for your ideas with the separation of mosque and state. What worries me, Doctor, is the fact that there's those, obviously militant Islamic, Islamic movement towards, it's not Islamic movement, it's Islamism, and those people that are violent, everything, we can identify those people, but apparently there's a group of people that are peaceful, but nevertheless accept or acknowledge or are willing to live with the radical insurgents, both in terms of the peaceful effort towards Sharia law, but also the radical terrorism.
Yeah, and I look at it. I compare it to drunk driving. You know, you can do all you want to have police on the streets and try to nab drunk drivers, but unless you address the alcoholism, unless you address the enabling family life and other things, you're not going to address the root problem. And in Islamism, when you have sermons in mosques across the country, there's been 5 videos in the last 6 months that have shown imams preaching virulent anti-Semitism. They're not preaching terrorism, but it's hate speech about Jews and conspiracy theories and other things that are being exposed. You can't but connect the dots and say that nonviolent anti-Semitism ends up in violent anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing with anti-Americanism. So, and people need to simplify things. I mean, we have the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia making this magical kingdom mystery tour across the United States of just sort of making all these false promises, and no one seems to connect the fact. Let me give you one highlight of what the problem is. Al-Azhar University, the Center for Learning for Islam, announced last week a religious ruling that jihad can only be declared by an Islamic state and by the government, and can never be declared by radical organizations. People said, oh, that's reform, that's the solution. Are you kidding me? The problem is the jihad. The problem is the Islamic State. So to say that it'd be like saying that gangs and viral groups can no longer use cocaine, but we governments can distribute the cocaine and use it as we see fit. Mm-hmm. The problem is the Islamic religious state. You have to separate mosque and state, and you can't say, well, only we governments can use it. And it's the same thing with these organizations in America that are Muslim. They have to reject political Islamic ideology, or else they're still part of the problem.
So how are we doing in the United States right now with regard to these types of reforms that you stand for in the American Islamic Forum for Democracy? The Third Jihad is a documentary that you published. By the way, I encourage our listeners to see this documentary. You can find it on YouTube. But how is it going in the United States?
Well, I think, with some of the political shifts we've seen happening in the last year, there's been some room for optimism. We have now more of a political movement that's addressing the problem by name, and however, I thought we made more progress. I thought, I'm very optimistic now to see John Bolton as National Security Advisor, to see Mike Pompeo and Secretary of State, that you have individuals now that are going to start to feel that talking about the Muslim Brotherhood is not going to be something they're going to be afraid to do, that beginning to identify the Iranians as the largest global threat will be a lot clearer. So I think we're making some political headway. Cultural headway, I think we need to do a lot more. We're still not putting significant investments as a country into identifying reformist Muslims that are anti-Islamist as a solution. We're still sort of keeping our distance and only paying attention after terror attacks. So there's a lot of cultural, I think, work that has to be done. The far left is still using identity politics much now, even more than ever, in the era of Trump, if you will, and conservatives, I think, need to start being on the offense. We're always on the defense, and I think that's been the bigger problem in the American, mindset, if you will, is that we often, in the conservative side of the equation, play defense. And I think we should be on offense and begin to not be shy in saying what we're for and what we're against.
Doctor, before I let you go, just genuinely appreciate everything you're doing and what your life stands for. And in my view, you're a real hero here in the United States. What will be your message to the students at Duke today?
Our message is that the bottom line is, if we care about our legacy, if we Muslims believe that this country gives us the greatest freedoms on the planet, then our 4 million Muslims in America have a role to play globally in where Islam is in its history that we cannot reject, that we should not squander, and that role is to not only embrace American freedom, but to begin to encapsulate the ideas of Jefferson and Madison and Alexander Hamilton and others, and begin to build institutions, begin to build movements that can start to then spread across the planet, no different than they use Facebook and YouTube and Twitter to transform revolutions and societies in the Middle East. We can continue to build on that. I think we have a responsibility to do that, and I'll simply ask them, do you feel it's your responsibility, not only as Muslims, but if you're non-Muslim, to take sides in this debate within the House of Islam?
Wonderful message. Again, I'm going to encourage our listeners to go read your book, first of all, the Battle for the Soul of Islam. Terrific read. Also, the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. It's AIFdemocracy.org, as I recall, AIFdemocracy.org. Doctor, always appreciate your commentary here on you. God bless you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Take care, Bob. God bless. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Certainly want his blessings today.